I have been on missions in Rwanda a few times, Uganda, India, very rural, the most abject poverty you can imagine. I've been in those places. And as much as I love it, nothing has gotten as deep in my heart as the Philippines has.
Yeah.
And what's happening in the sex trade.
Yeah.
And I will say this, there is revival happening in the sex trade. And it's not just a slogan. We are watching the power of God transform not just the girls, transforming the whole city.
Hey there, folks. Welcome back. As I believe I mentioned in the introduction, I have as my guest right now a very dear old friend, Keith Guinta. Keith, am I pronouncing that right?
Guinta.
I know how to pronounce it. I've known you for 30 years. We've been friends for all these years. The reason you're here today is not just because you're my friend. You write these extraordinary essays at winepatch.org. That's the place. Mm-hmm. So you blog at winepatch.org. I've shared a number of those things on social media. These are important pieces. So I want to encourage people right out of the gate, go to winepatch.org and read what Keith Guinta is writing. But the reason you're here today is because you were just in the Philippines with a ministry called Wipe Every Tear. It is so beautiful what you do. You've written about that recently at Wine Patch. And I just said, when you get back from the Philippines, I want you to come on the show and talk about this, because this is, I mean, it's so beautiful that you and Kenny Sack, who's been on the program with you before, that you're doing this. So first of all, tell us what Wipe Every Tear is. What is this ministry?
Sure. Wipe Every Tear is based in Boise, Idaho, and it's really just Kenny and a small staff there. But the primary staff is in the Philippines. So in Angeles City, which is just north of Manila, it is one of the worst places on the planet for sex trafficking. And so Wipe Every Tear has set shop up there. We have safe homes, we have offices, we have staff. Most of the staff, first of all, it's all Filipino. And most of the staff are ladies who have been rescued from trafficking. So once they've been restored, they want to stay in it to help girls on this journey out of trafficking.
You know, we should tell people, in case there's anybody listening, you and I met at St. Paul's Darien, one of the most amazing churches. There's no way really to do justice to what came out of that church. Maybe before we get into Wipe Every Tear and all these other things, we should touch on that history.
Yeah.
Because when I had my born again experience in the summer of '88, the man who led me to faith, Ed Tuttle, he said to me, "Oh, you're living in New Canaan, Connecticut. What? You know, there's a church like down the street in Darien called St. Paul's, and you should check it out." And I thought, well, what do I know? You know, right? And it was an Episcopal church, but it was, how do you put it? It was like the flagship of the charismatic renewal movement in the Episcopal church and beyond. I mean, it was like, it was a candlestick church, if you could ever use the term candlestick church. And that's where I met so many people that are friends to this day. That's right. Obviously, you're one of them. And, you know, you were there. When did you start going to St. Paul's Darien?
1978.
Whoa.
So that's why your interview with Greg Laurie, I was hanging on it, because that was the tail end of the Jesus movement. That was just as things were winding down, but there was still so much power. And I would even say between 78 and 88, St. Paul's had already begun to change.
Yeah.
In 1978, not to make you feel bad.
No, but I know that.
The bar was set for me for church.
Yeah.
And we've never been able to find that mix of strong biblical and freedom and power in the spirit.
Right.
Having both of those things.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
No, I mean, I realized that I had the privilege of catching the tail end of this, because a lot of it was still there, but it was obvious that there was a heyday and people would talk about it. And it really was, that was the tail end of the Jesus movement. So, but so you were like in high school?
I was in high school.
And how did you...
Yeah.
I mean, look, you grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. Just so people get your biography, you grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, not as some kind of born again evangelical. So what happened?
Catholic.
So what happened in your right? But there's Catholic and then there's Catholic. You grew up as somebody who did not know God personally. You're kind of going through the motions, and then as a teenager, what happens to you?
I got arrested.
Wait a minute.
So I got arrested in high school, and I was off the rails already by this point. And my dad basically, I was grounded for life, except my cousin across the street became a Jesus freak. Now, he had been a drug addict and was a complete mess. Suddenly, he was a new person. And so my dad let me go to this youth group. It's the only thing he let me do, because I was basically grounded for life. And Scott took me, he was 4 or 5 years older than me at the time, on fire for Christ. And I walked into this church. I couldn't believe. Now, I walked in, if you remember, I walked in with a Sucrets box in my shirt pocket with joints in it, because I thought, Darien, I could sell some joints.
You could sell weed on your way to church or during church. Hey,
this is who I was.
That's who I am, you know?
Yep.
No, but wait a second. So I forget these details.
True.
This is why it's kind of fun to interview friends, because you're telling me stuff that you told me years ago. I forgot all about it. Okay, so you're arrested. Your father just like lays down the law, but he lets you go with your born-again cousin, who I didn't meet till a year and a half ago. I've been hearing about your cousin all these years.
That's right.
I met him at IHOP with Mike Bickle and the whole gang in Kansas City a year and a half ago. But Scott, so he's your cousin, and he takes you to the youth group or to the church at St. Paul's?
Both. So I went to the youth group. That's where I met Jill, 1978. I met my wife.
Wait a minute. Now I don't remember this. So Jill, to whom you're married now, all these years, you met her in 78?
We dated for 3 months in 1979, and she dumped me. And it took quite a few years for me to get her back.
Unbelievable.
That's true, but Eric, I walked into that church, and the Jesus Revolution, they often would refer to it as the Jesus people. There was something about the people.
Right.
So it wasn't a cloud of glory. There weren't feathers coming down. Gold teeth weren't popping in people's mouth. It was the presence of God and the love in the people. I'd never met people in a community like this. And that really began my born-again experience.
See, it's funny you say this, because a lot of times people, maybe they grew up in the church or they had a bad experience in church. For me, it was just the opposite. That when I encountered these born-again believers, I had never met any group of people that were totally authentic, fun-loving, funny, and loved God. I mean, it was like the whole package. And I thought, I didn't know these kind of people even existed. I was sure they didn't exist. And so when you meet the real thing, you're kind of astonished by it. So you're saying, here you are a teenager dealing drugs, and suddenly you meet these people that they change your life.
That's right. There's the famous quote from John Wimber. John Wimber met the Lord, was reading in the book of Acts and the Gospels, and he went to church because he wanted to do the stuff. You remember that?
That's the famous phrase. John Wimber is like, he's reading about all these miracles.
Yeah.
And then he goes to church and he's like, how come you're not doing all that cool stuff I'm reading in the New Testament? When do you do that stuff?
Right.
And they weren't doing it.
St. Paul's was doing it. We were laying hands to heal the sick. There were deliverances. I mean, demons came out of people. I didn't see the dead raised there. We didn't have lepers cleansed, but we were living that type of life. It was glorious.
That was so attractive to me at the time. And I actually thought, again, because I'm coming out of a secular background, right? Even though I was raised in a Greek Orthodox church, by this time I've drifted. I had gone to Yale, and I'm just like drifting around. I have no idea. I assume Christianity isn't true. So when I got the real thing at St. Paul's Darien, I realized, this is the whole package. It's like pay one price. You get people speaking in tongues. You get people praying for healing. People are getting visions and miracles. The preaching is phenomenal, biblical, glorious preaching. Terry Fulham, one of the greats of history. And the worship was magnificent. So it was like the whole package. And you're right, though, when you say like, I kind of thought, this is what these churches are like. And I don't know that I've ever found a church really like that in all the years since. That was a particularly special situation.
Jill and I planted a church. We started a church with 4 families in our home and could not recreate. that's probably the wrong word. We couldn't experience that type of church life.
Part of it is just is God's sovereign,
Yep,
you know. Okay,
true.
we're going to go to break. I'm talking to my friend Keith Guinta, Guinta. Keith Guinta, you want to go to winepatch.org. We'll be right back. Folks, welcome back. Talking to my friend Keith Guinta. And the place you can find him is at winepatch.org, winepatch.org. Keith, I want to talk about your trip to the Philippines with Wipe Every Tear, which is this ministry that rescues young women from the sex trade. It's horrifying. But before we get to that, I just want to continue with your story a little bit so people get to know you.
Yeah.
So you come to faith as a teenager and you get totally plugged in. And it's kind of interesting because I think there are people around the world and around this country, they're looking for environments like that and they can't find them. What you experienced and what I had the privilege of experiencing, it was the real thing. Like these were people whose faith was mature. They might not have been perfect, but their faith was really mature. And I have said this to you many times that you were discipled by some of the best, some amazing people.
Yeah. My cousin Scott, without doing it as a program, he discipled me in the most effective, powerful, lasting way possible. And that was, like I said, he was 4 or 5 years older. He took me under his wing. He basically said, follow me.
Yeah.
Follow me. So I was in the youth group and I went to church. But the most transformative thing for me, just in terms of community, is that he took me to where he hung out with his friends. I could list a whole bunch of names. I don't know if you would have known them. But I spent that first year with a group of people that were 4 or 5 years older than me. And that was more transformative than even youth group. Because youth group, you're all the same age. You're all not really sure who you are. I'm watching these people who were sold out for Jesus. They really were. And they walked in, it was very normal. They weren't weird. They weren't. And yet everywhere they went, all they did was talk about Jesus. And they would pray for people and evangelize. And people were getting saved. And we had worship and Bible studies. And that was my first foray. That first year with Scott and his friends really set a foundation.
Well, again, I mean, I mentioned to you, Ed Tuttle, he had pointed me to St. Paul's Darien. And I remember all the people that I met, the level of spiritual maturity, combined with fun-loving character, it just made it so attractive. So I made all these friends, and I guess I met you about a year after I'd originally shown up there. And it really is interesting how we were really grounded in the basics. And I that's my longing for a lot of people that, a lot of people can have a very shallow experience of the Christian faith, and you want them to get the whole thing. You want them to see the stuff. You want them to know about the miraculous. You want them to know about God's love and all these different things. In any event, I want to just move on to talk about what you've been doing more lately. Again, you're writing at winepatch.org, and your stuff is terrific. So I want to tell people, go to winepatch.org. But the ministry Wipe Every Tear, which people can find at wipeeverytear.org, when did you get acquainted with them?
Oh, good question. Probably 4 years ago. So I've been 3 times already.
Right.
And now I'm on the board. So I'm even a little bit more official. But Eric, I have been on missions in Rwanda a few times, Uganda, India, very rural, the most abject poverty you can imagine. I've been in those places. And as much as I love it, nothing has gotten as deep in my heart as the Philippines has. And what's happening in the sex trade. And I will say this, there is revival happening in the sex trade. And it's not just a slogan. We are watching the power of God transform not just the girls, transforming the whole city. It's happening.
You were telling me about that on the phone. I can't remember the details, but so you go over with Kenny and a team of how many of you travel
this time
when you do this kind of a trip?
Every trip has been different. It is very important that you have men who look like us. So on this strip in Angeles City, they estimate It's about 12,000 lovely young girls being trafficked. And so the Filipino men are not allowed into these bars. It's for us. It's for the vacationers.
So this is for the tourists?
It's for the
tourists. This is sex tourism.
It is exactly
It's out of the pit of hell, and it's in the Philippines.
Yes.
And so, in other words, the reason you're able to get away with what you do is because you look like one of these customers.
Right. And so the Filipino men can't go in and do bar ministry, and the Filipino girls can't go in by themselves. So we become the entrance into the bars, and we go in with the Filipino girls who speak the language, and they have come out of sex trafficking.
Okay, so you're going in
we go
with
in
the
the
girls
bars.
that have come out of this life.
Yes, yes.
The most obvious question for somebody listening to this program would be like, well, wait a minute, you're going into this this kind of environment. Is that a good thing for you to be doing? Should you be going into this kind of environment? So you told me what you do before you go in.
Yeah. The first thing I'll say is it's exactly where Jesus would go. If he was walking the earth today, I don't think he'd be too impressed with our church services. I think he'd be walking the strip. It's where he is. And what we do, the key, the engine room of what we do is worship. It is worship. It's spirit-filled devotion to the Father in the power of the Spirit, affection set on Jesus, and we do it for hours. This is what we talked about last time.
But this is right. But this is so key because there are a lot of people who are, pretty serious about their faith, but they don't get this piece. And this is very powerful that what you're saying is that when you are doing actual worship, when you're worshiping God, there is tremendous spiritual power. Yeah. This is not just an emotional thing, that there's spiritual power in worshiping God, and that you then carry that into these dark places, and it's palpable because of the results.
Yeah. We worship him because he's worthy. We worship him to get anointed, that smearing of the oil of the Lord on us, like you said. And it also changes our vision. So look, if I said, hey, Eric, let's go to Angeles City, we'll go to Walking Street, and let's go be ambassadors for Christ. And we walk into a bar where there are 50 naked women on the stage with strings, and they got nothing on. And you think you're going to walk in there and just start handing out chick tracts and everybody's going to get saved. No. No warm-blooded man can walk into this place under his own strength. And I can tell you, because of worship, we worship for hours and then we walk, and you have to go late. Now it's midnight, 1 a.m. when things are cooking, and you walk down the street. You don't see brothels. You don't see depraved, sexually broken men that you want to hit with a baseball bat. You don't see prostitutes. We don't even use that word, by the way. It's like the Matrix. It's like the code that's running behind the simulation. Now you get to see it. And that's what worship does. It recalibrates your eyes. You walk into the bar, Jesus is here. Quite literally, he lives in us. The kingdom of God has just walked into this bar, and we don't skulk in the back. We walk in, we high-five the girls, we'll buy the men rounds, we'll ask them how they're doing. What are you doing here? Because this is now the presence of God wafting into this place. And that's when things start to happen. So I can tell you, with all honesty, on my 3 trips, it's never once been sexual. It's not. And I'm not saying that to brag. Kenny has said, if you feel temptation, run. You turn around and run. Don't sit there and try to fight but when you soak yourself in the presence of God, when you walk in, your heart breaks. Eric, your heart just breaks. You see these girls on stage, they're not happy. They don't want to be there. The bartenders, the mama-sans, which are the pimps, you look around, everybody's miserable.
I was going to say,
everybody's
the brokenness
miserable.
is so obvious.
Only
it should be.
Satan can build a kingdom where everybody is miserable. And that's what we walk into. And that's why we don't come in under it. We come in over it. And so we'll sit down, and they have awful ways of picking the girls. They'll have lasers. They'll hand you lei and you sit there and you go, yeah, that one. And the mama-san will bring the girl over and you buy them a drink.
Even that's dehumanizing.
Awful. Or they have numbers, and you call the girl, I'll take number 25. And the sick part is these girls can then be selected to go back to a hotel with these men for not very much money. And they're with these men for the entire night. And it's unthinkable. It is unthinkable.
Well, somebody's making money. The girls are not.
The girls are not. The girls are not. And so that's a big part of our ministry is the bar ministry at night. We go in, we literally sit down and go, all right, Lord, who do you have your eyes on tonight? Who do you want to rescue tonight? And there's a whole process of how we can get them out in the moment as a paying customer, or we will go back and meet them when they get off at 4 a.m. We'll go back and walk them home. And we've got unbelievable stories of girls on this trip. We'll call her D, one of the Bethel team. They went into one of the bars and the Lord highlighted her. So they asked for her to come down.
Okay, when you say the Lord highlighted her, somebody had the sense that God, and again, this is supernatural. There's no way to explain this and you don't have to believe it. But the point is that somebody walks in there and says, I believe God is pointing me to that girl.
Yep.
And so at that moment, what do?
So she comes off the stage. She sits down terrified because she thinks of what is about to happen. It turns out it was her second night working in the bar. And they told her why we're here, what Wipe Every Tear offers, which, by the way...
So they immediately tell the truth.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We don't...
Right.
But you know what Kenny says? You don't have to talk about Jesus. Don't talk about him. Be him. Be Jesus to these girls. You look them in the eye. You tell them how lovely they are. You tell them your hair's beautiful. Honey, do you have a dream? Did you ever want to go to college? Did you ever hope to work? You just start tugging on the things that's in all of our hearts. And when they say yes, then our Filipina girls will then kind of move in and they'll pull out, here's my bar card. I used to work here.
Right.
Here's my college ID. I'm in college now, or I graduated college. This is what we do. So we don't just change their zip code. We get them out. They live in a safe home, in a Christian environment. They get high school education. They get college education. They get sponsorship for any children they have, which many of them have children, because it comes with the trade. And Wipe Every Tear does all of this. Some of these girls are in the houses for 6, 7 years because it takes that long to heal and graduate and get a degree.